So, Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, Shedeur Sanders, and Dylan Gabriel. Who starts? Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So, entering the draft this year, the Browns had a quarterback room of former Pittsburgh Steeler Kenny Pickett, 40-year-old Joe Flacco, and Deshaun Watson with an Achilles that was snapped twice in the space of about 4 months. Not exactly the greatest quarterback room in Browns history, but certainly not the worst. This team has had quarterback rooms like Deshaun Kaiser, Kevin Hogan, and Cody Kessler, as well as Brandon Weeden, Brian Hoyer, and Jason Campbell. And that's just some of the many hilarious quarterback rooms that the Browns have had over the years. But after the Browns drafted both Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback room discussion is now far more entertaining and hilarious in its own way. It's certainly the talk amongst Browns fans, and even the mainstream NFL media is pretty keyed in on the quarterback battle in Cleveland. Because that's what it is. It's a true quarterback competition. The likes you don't really see that much in the NFL. Teams usually have some kind of line of succession in place within the quarterback room. There will be some competition for backup and third string roles, etc. But most starters are pretty much normally set. If it does happen, it's between two guys, usually a rookie and a vet. The team already has a vet and they'll draft a rookie with the aim of maybe replacing him. Whereas, with the Browns, they have 4 different guys with a legit chance to win the starting job. It's like a college quarterback competition. Best man wins in every essence of the phrase. So it's something that I am personally really looking forward to watching this upcoming summer, and I'm sure a lot of Browns fans feel the same way. Rookie minicamp starts in just a few days on the 9th of May, so Sanders and Gabriel will get their first chance to compete and show what they have. And I'll also probably do a video on all the rookies during the Browns minicamp as well. But today, going back to the quarterbacks, I wanted to give my initial thoughts on where I think they all kind of stack up in regards to their chances of actually making the roster, because the Browns won't carry 4 quarterbacks on the 53, so someone will be the odd guy out, and then B, the chances of being the week 1 starter. I'll rank each guy 1 to 4 on the likelihood for both of those, and just trying to give my thoughts on where I'm at before we go into minicamp and training camp, etc. So obviously this could be subject to change as we go throughout the summer, but this is just where I'm at right now. I'm going to start with the most likely to be the week 1 starter, because I think that's probably the least surprising one. And spoiler alert, it is different to my order of likelihood to make the roster, which might not make any sense right now, but I will explain when I get to it. So first and foremost, the player I think the most likely to be the week 1 starter, drum roll please, is Kenny Pickett. I know. I kind of went back and forth on this one, and I initially had Joe Flacco, but Pickett has just edged him out as we sit here today. The reason why, well, they gave him the number 8 jersey, so of course he's starting. I'm kidding. I just think that there's more to the Pickett acquisition than people want to think. Stefanski clearly likes him. They identified him early, as their first quarterback target essentially this offseason, and they gave up draft capital to get him. They've spoken about how he will have a chance to compete for the job. He has spoken about it. I do genuinely believe he has a good chance to be the week 1 starter. Good enough to put him at number 1. And even if he doesn't, outright win the competition, let's say, if the team does feel that Pickett and Flacco essentially are on the same level and offer the same level of production, then, they're going to go with Pickett because he is younger, he's cheaper, he has a chance to actually develop into, maybe a long-term starter, whereas Joe Flacco is 40 years old. I love me some Flacco fever, but that is just the truth. Kenny Pickett was a first-round pick for a reason. I did a video on the acquisition of him where, at the time, a lot of people were laughing. Yes, I laughed initially when the trade came through. But, I spoke then, and I'll say it again now. Like, he was a first-round pick for a reason. I'm not saying that he's going to be the Browns' next franchise quarterback, but he has a winning record in the NFL. He's played winning football in the NFL under pretty bad circumstances. You look at that Steelers team, especially in his last year there with Matt Canada, some of the weapons they had, and then to go to Philadelphia, be a backup on a Super Bowl winning team, the experience that brings. He's still only, I think, 26 years old. I don't think he's someone to just be discarded. I generally believe that he has a great chance to win the starting job, at least for week one, and enough, as I said, to put him here at number one. It was Joe Flacco for most of this, but in kind of the recent weeks, I've changed this to Kenny Pickett. But number two is Joe Flacco. If Browns get to training camp and think shit, we have a really, really good defense and enough playmakers to be, a competent offense at least, and that Flacco gives them a chance to win with that, then they're probably going to go with Flacco, no doubt about it. If they think they can genuinely mount a playoff push with Flacco, then you start him and, you go all in on that year. Joe has more experience than the other three guys combined. He's been successful in this scheme and literally led this team to the playoffs 2 years ago. So, if that's how they view the roster during training camp, then they probably will go with Joe Flacco. But the reason he is number two for me now is because I think it's somewhat unlikely the team will feel that way. Not that I think they'll suck or that Joe will suck necessarily, and or that they'll just punt on the year. I just don't think they'll be at a point where they'll be like, yeah, I think we can, go and win it all this year with Joe Flacco. I just doubt that more than I would doubt them going, I think we can win some games and have something potentially long term here with Kenny Pickett. So that's why I've got Kenny Pickett as the most likely, I think, to be the week one starter. But then obviously Joe Flacco at number two, and the reason being Joe Flacco ahead of the rookies is because it kind of says it for itself. They are the rookies. Even if the Browns got to training camp and went through training camp and they identified either Dillon Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders as potential starters and think, okay, we might have something here, it's still going to be doubtful they start week one. I still think in that situation the Browns would go with either Flacco or Pickett. In that situation, maybe it depends who's the better backup for who the guy plans to take over them, and that would be Pickett. And obviously, and that's how they would view it. So it is doubtful that either rookie starts week one. So that is why neither of them are 1 and 2 on this list. To rank them, between themselves, I will go Dillon Gabriel at 3 and Shedeur Sanders at 4. Which will be a common theme, obviously, on the most likely to make the roster as well. They drafted him higher. They clearly view him higher. I just think, and he's started more games. So if it does get to a point where, I don't know, Joe Flacco is injured, terrible. Kenny Pickett is injured, terrible. I think it would probably be more likely right now for me to say that Dillon Gabriel would be the starter just because of the experience he had at college. You look at the guys like Bo Nix that came in and started last year, not similar player in terms of play style, but similar player in terms of, played a lot of games at college football. So, if one of these guys had to start week one, God forbid, then it probably would be Dillon Gabriel. And I say God forbid, I mean, if either guy lights it up during training camp and the Browns genuinely have a starter here, then obviously, they should start week one. But just as I view it now, this is a 3rd and 5th round pick. I think we should temper expectations slightly. So that's how I would rank, the likelihood of being the week one starter. Now let's get into what might be considered, a bit more controversial or interesting, shall we say, which is the most likely to make the roster. Um, so what I'll do is I'll just say it first, give the list first, and then I'll kind of explain where I'm at with it. Number 1, Dylan Gabriel. Number 2, Kenny Pickett. Number 3, Shedeur Sanders. And number 4, Joe Flacco. I'll start reverse order maybe, because I think most people are thinking, well, how is Joe Flacco the second most likely to start, but the fourth most likely to make the roster? And that is purely because, Joe Flacco either starts or I don't think he's on the roster. As I mentioned earlier, if they go into, if they get through training camp and think, okay, this is a really good defense, we've got weapons here, I think we can actually win this year, mount a playoff push, and we can do that with Joe Flacco, then he's going to start. But if they don't feel that way and they decide not to start Joe Flacco, let's say it's either in that outcome but flipped with Kenny Pickett, yes, he probably would have more chances making it as the backup because he's a competent backup if you're trying to win that year. But, on the more likely side of it, if it's because they think we're not going to win this year, because, we don't think we can go and win with any of these guys and genuinely mount a real playoff push, then why would you have Joe Flacco on the roster as a backup? It doesn't make any sense, especially over a younger guy, two rookies, because obviously in this case it probably would be Kenny Pickett that would win that job. But even if it's not Kenny Pickett, why would you start him over either two rookies or a 26-year-old guys that, even if they don't this training camp show that maybe they think they can be your starter, there's still that chance in terms of development, whereas you don't get that with a 40-year-old Joe Flacco. So that's why he's the least likely to make the roster, in my opinion, but still the second most likely to start, because when it comes down to the starting, it comes down to two things. It will be, is Joe Flacco going to win us this year? No, then it's Kenny Pickett. And if that's the case, Joe Flacco, again, as I said, is off the roster. So that's why he is fourth for me. I think, as I said, it just makes so much more sense to go with the younger guys if Flacco's not your starter in any situation, really, and especially in a situation where if you're not punting on the year, but you know what I mean, you think, neither of these guys are going to go win us the Super Bowl, but, maybe they could win us some games and be we can develop these into a future starter, then Joe Flacco becomes the odd man out. That's just how it is. And Gabriel and Sanders, the reason Gabriel's number 1 is because I think, as I mentioned, the Browns clearly identified him as their number 1 quarterback prospect in that range. They drafted him over Shedeur Sanders. There's been all the reports that he was actually their second, highest graded quarterback on their board this year. So they invested the higher pick into him. It's a 3rd round pick compared to a 5th round pick. And as I mentioned, they clearly graded him and viewed him higher as Shedeur Sanders to draft him ahead of him. So that's why I think not only is Dylan Gabriel the most likely, but I think he's the only one that I can sit here today and say is a guaranteed roster lock. I don't think that would be controversial to say. I think he has a 99.999% chance of making the roster. That 0.0001% chance, of course, being that he does something incredibly fucking stupid or, does something to get himself kicked off the team. But other than that, I think he's the only guy that I can say, yep, he's going to 100%. Well, as I said, I just contradicted myself. 99.999% be on the roster next year. Whereas with obviously Shedeur Sanders, he's a 5th round pick. You picked him at 144. Not saying that he's a worse player than Dylan Gabriel. I'm not. I of course had Shedeur Sanders graded as a better player, as a better prospect. But he's a 5th round pick, and he brings, as much as people don't want it, it is baggage in a way with being a Shedeur Sanders, having the last name, bringing the media attention that comes with it, to the point that if him and Dylan Gabriel are both not that great, but about the same level, you're going to go with Dylan Gabriel and maybe even vice versa if they're both good. So that's just how that's just why I have them two ranked as they are. But I still think they have a better, as I said, Dylan Gabriel I think is definitely going to be on the 53. but I think Shedeur has a better chance to make the roster than a Joe Flacco, and obviously Gabriel included this as well, because as I mentioned, if you don't go with Joe Flacco as the starter, then he's off the roster, whereas you don't need to go with Sanders or Gabriel as the starter for them to make the roster. You can go with Kenny Pickett as the starter and still have Gabriel and Sanders as developmental pieces as well, and vice versa. However that ends up cutting, whichever guy it is, you keep the other two guys. So that's why the two rookies are more likely to make the roster, in my opinion, than Joe Flacco. And then as with Kenny Pickett, that's just self-explanatory. Of course, just apply the same reason why I think he's got more chance of being a starter to why he's got more chance of being making the roster over Joe Flacco. But then obviously with Shedeur Sanders, the reason I would have Kenny Pickett over him, just because, as I said, with him starting, they invested into him. They clearly felt like they had something maybe there. I think that's just more, encouragement they have in him than maybe a Shedeur Sanders, someone that they passed on 6 times in the draft. So, how would I hope it goes? Best case scenario for me is that one of the rookies comes and completely balls out during training camp and becomes the starter. That's the best case scenario here. Or even a Kenny Pickett with his age as well. I love Joe Flacco. I appreciate everything he did for the Browns, but he's 40 years old. There's no long-term success there with Joe Flacco, whereas there is potential long-term success with the other 3 guys. So that's just how it kind of ended up falling that way for me. So that's how I'm feeling it. As I said, this is subject to change. As we go through minicamp, maybe Shedeur Sanders lights it up and, puts himself ahead of Dylan Gabriel and vice versa. Or maybe when we get to training camp, who knows, maybe 40-year-old Joe Flacco comes and shocks us all and looks incredible out there and wins the job outright. So we never know, of course. Right now, we'll have to wait and see how the summer unfolds. But that's just how I view it. Currently, the Browns quarterback room situation, as I said, as we head into minicamp and into the summer, there's been a lot of talk about it. I've obviously been engaging in that talk, and as I said, I've been back and forth with it. But I think Kenny Pickett, I think he's going to be the week 1 starter. I think that's where I'm at. Kenny Two Gloves. But that would do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to 1 fan a day, I'm happy, because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing rest of the week, but most importantly, go Browns.